Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This section will be over chapter 3-2, and it will be about the New England colonies. Okay, one of the main questions is, how did religious beliefs and dissent is disagreement, influence the New England colonies? Religion played a key role in colonies that were established in New England. So again, we're talking about Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. Many colonies were established by people who were exiled, that means removed, because of their religious beliefs. A group known as the Puritans wanted to reform the Church of England. So again, we're going to start with this first group that's coming to New England, and they're called the Puritans. They wanted to reform the Church of England. A little background on the Church of England. This is an official church. It's an ecclesiastical, that means it's a church governing body in England, and you have to be a member. Again, in the early 1600s, the Puritans were respected professionals who were influential in England. So Puritans weren't the down and out. They were respected. They were professional. That meant they had seats in Parliament. They did well. The problem is they're going to have a rub with the way the Church of England is run and with the King of England. In the 1620s, King Charles I opposed and persecuted the Puritans. Again, this is a very complicated situation, but to simplify it, the Puritans thought that the church should be run in a different manner. And again, because they felt that way, they pulled back. They would have meetings, they would have organizations, things like that were not approved and sanctioned by the church. So the king felt that the Puritans were, disobedient, and this set up for a lot of problems. In 1630, about 900 Puritans left England in 11 ships led by John Winthrop. So at this point, there was no purifying the Church of England. It wasn't that they left the church per se. They wanted to leave and start a new church. And again, they hoped to do that in the New World, where you didn't have the mingling of church and government in the same place. Because at this point, the Puritans thought that the Church of England was highly corrupt. So these Puritans, led by John Winthrop, they had formed the Massachusetts Bay Company, which received a charter to establish settlements in present-day Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So again, they had official government permission to do this. This was a charter. When we talk about the geography of New England, this is different than Virginia. Virginia had soil and climate that was great for growing tobacco. Well, we're going to find New England is different. New England, by the way, is referring to New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. The landforms, again, New England is made up of hills, mountains, forests. The soil is thin and rocky. So farming isn't going to be something that you're going to be able to do on a large scale. Now, of course, people had farms. Of course, they grew crops. But you're not going to have 500, 1,000 acre farms or plantations like you did in the South. You wouldn't risk it. It would be too risky to try to grow that. Your crop might die out because of the climate. The winters are long and snowy. The summers are shorter and warm. That's the opposite of what you need for a good growing climate. The colonists caught fewer diseases and lived longer than Virginia colonists. Again, it was a more of a better climate. Think of it, less mosquitoes that would transmit disease. The Puritans established several settlements in their colony, including Boston. By 1643, about 20,000 people lived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In other words, it's growing quickly. By the mid-1630s, Massachusetts Bay had an elected governor and an elected assembly, the General Court, but only adult male Puritans could vote. So again, that tradition of representative government is being passed on. Didn't have the House of Burgesses like you did in Jamestown, Virginia, but representative government was still alive in the minds and hearts of English men and women. The Puritans believed that towns and churches should manage their own affairs. They believed people should work hard and live in strong and stable families. Each Puritan town governed itself by setting up a town meeting, but only men could participate. At a town meeting, you would be able to talk about any political issues. You could talk about taxation. This is where people came together and they talked about this, and they felt, again, strongly that they should manage their own affairs. They still had the bad taste in their mouth from England when they were ruled, in many cases, beyond their control. Although they founded their own colonies so they could have religious freedom, the Puritans did not believe in religious toleration for others. Disagreements about how to live out the Bible led to the founding of other colonies in New England. So in other words, as more and more Puritans came to the New World, people would have different ideas about how to best live out the Bible. And the Bible for the Puritans would be the source of their understanding. Again, this was crucial for any Protestant Christian to believe. Again, that was that personal understanding that you had of the Bible. And people had disagreements about how to best live out those biblical directives. Rhode Island, Providence. Roger Williams, he's a minister. He thought the Puritans should split entirely from the Church of England. In other words, to cut every tie. He thought colonists should pay Native Americans for their land. Because of this, Williams spoke out. He criticized the leaders in the John Winthrop in the new colony. Again, he felt natives should be paid. He'll be expelled from Massachusetts Bay ultimately. Initially, he was going to be just taken back, but then there's some thought about literally detaining and holding him, jailing him. Williams is kicked out, and he basically runs for his life. Williams moved to present-day Rhode Island. He purchased the land from the natives, and he founded Providence. Providence is a fancy term, but it means God providing, and that was in 1636. In 1644, the colonists in Rhode Island receive a charter from the king to govern themselves, so it becomes official. The colonists decided that Rhode Island would have no established church. In other words, nobody was forced to join. There was more religious toleration there. Williams is still a minister, but again, you're not forcing people to think a particular way, and people aren't going to be punished if they had skipped a church service or something like that. Many people found religious freedom in Rhode Island, even people outside of the Christian tradition that were of the Jewish faith. Another issue was with Boston resident Anne Hutchinson. She questioned some Puritan teachings. She was expelled from Massachusetts in 1638. Some of the teachings, for instance, were she would hold Bible meetings in her home, and she would teach, grown men and grown women. The Puritans felt that ministers should be men only. So this was a conflict of interest, and it caused tension. And eventually she'll be asked to leave the colony. Hutchinson established a settlement on an island that is part of present-day Rhode Island. Hartford, Connecticut. Thomas Hooker, who disagreed with Puritan leaders, he left Massachusetts with about 100 followers. They settled in present-day Connecticut. They found the town of Hartford, and soon many other Puritans followed, and there'll be new settlements. And then again, in 1639, the colonists established a new elected legislature and governor. Again, more representative government. And in 1662, the king granted Connecticut a charter that made it self-governing. One of the most famous things they wrote were simply the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. This is huge for representative government in the New World. Another colony, New Hampshire, John Wheelwright, he's expelled from Massachusetts because he agreed with some of Hutchinson's views. In 1638, Wheelwright and some followers founded the town of colony in New Hampshire. In 1680, a charter is given, making it legit and legal as well. New England we're switching gears here. New England had some great resources. They have seas, forests, and farms, and this was a great living. If you look here on the coast and you look at the key, you can see that there's a lot of lumber, there's whaling, all these are fish, shipping. The barrels would be rum, cattle. These symbols over here, that's grain. You've got iron. Notice you don't have tobacco. Again, the climate, the soil, it's just not going to work in New England. So different industry popped up in New England than in the South. While the colonies prospered, Native Americans in New England struggled. By 1670, there were only 12,000 Native Americans in New England, 1/10 of their population 100 years earlier. Again, so conflict between these two culture groups is growing. The main cause of this decline was diseases Native Americans caught from the Europeans. So when we go back and we look at, literally the lack of Native American population, again, we can see that, these problems, these treaties that occurred between the English and the natives, we think about the first Thanksgiving, those things are falling apart. They're not holding together. In addition to that, though, the Europeans brought disease. And again, the natives didn't have, they weren't properly inoculated. So when they got the disease, it often was fatal. In 1675, a major conflict erupted between Native American groups led by Metacom and the Puritans. During the conflict, which was called King Philip's War, Metacom and his allies destroyed 12 English towns. So again, 50 years later, the peace treaty, it's done between the Pilgrims and the natives. After Metacom was killed in 1676, the war ended, leaving the English free to expand. Again, King Philip, ironically, who was native, he's killed by a fellow Native American that had been on the side of the English. So not all natives supported each other. Again, they did what was best for their interests. But again, this was a big war. It may not sound like it. Technically, it's the population-wise, it's one of the most costly wars in American history. Remember, there weren't as many people that were living in the colonies at this time. But this was a big deal. And this is going to greatly lead to Native Americans being killed or leaving New England. By the 1670s, a new generation of people had been born in North America. The new generation had lost some of the older Puritans' religious fervor. They had grown up in the colonies. If you try to explain to young people about the Church of England, they didn't grow up in that. They didn't understand. So again, the colony isn't as strict as it used to be. Successful merchants were becoming the new community leaders rather than religious leaders. All right, thanks for listening. Feel free to refer back to it should you need to.